Hello again, book lovers, and in this instalment I'll tell you what I thought about The Story of the Goths by Henry Bradley. Well, the reason I read this book is because it's one of the many pieces that are missing from my jigsaw puzzle of world history. Goths, we talk a lot about them. What the hell are they? Where did they come from? Often described as a Germanic tribe, sometimes said to have come from an island near Sweden. Right at the end of the book I learned that the Crimea was still called Gothia until about 200 years ago. And also, at the end of the book, answered one of my long-standing questions: when did Spain actually begin to exist as a unified territory? But we'll get to that. For now, let's go from the beginning. We've got, first of all, a lovely little woodcut called In the Forest. That's on page 8, which seems to have nothing to do with the story, but I very much enjoyed because it gives you a little bit of an idea of the territories from where these Goths came. Their famous sacking of Rome, if we know anything about the Goths, we probably know that, is obviously covered in a long and tortuous history of strange names, alliances, betrayals, rash decisions, successful marriages, failed marriages by people with names like Atavulf, Witigis, Theodoric, who was perhaps the most famous of their kings, along with Amalasuintha and Theodahad. What I really want to find out is about the Goths in Spain, and disappointingly, this book didn't really enter into that until right at the end, but I can't quibble too much about that. I could have bought E.A. Thompson's book, The Goths in Spain, but that would have cost me €60. Maybe later. And so we have basically the story of the alliances, the agreements, the accords between the Goths and the Romans who'd agreed to let the Goths settle in southern Gaul as a kind of satellite state. Well, I say that, but you'd have to read the book really, it's so complicated. One thing I should mention is that this book was written in 1887 and published in 1888, the author Henry Bradley being one of the first writers and editors of the Oxford English Dictionary. So it's quite entertaining to read it from the point of view of a 19th century English schoolchild and be confronted with long, nicely constructed sentences which just lay out all the facts. Here's one I've just chosen at random. Page 219 begins. Witigis the Unready. Honest and well-meaning the successor of Theodahad seems to have been, and his valour as a soldier had been proved 30 years before in the war against the Gepids. But he had not the talents which were needed for the supreme command of an army, especially when the adversary was a man like Belisarius. So you get the flavour of it. Belisarius, I should say, is one of the main characters in this book, who has constant cat and mouse games with the Goths. But the best example of the writing style is the beginning of the penultimate chapter 35, The Fall of the Visigoths. Get this. Everyone has heard of, quote, Roderick, the last of the Goths, end quote, semicolon. But of the real history of this famous king, we know scarcely anything for certain. Well, you're addressing an audience with everyone has heard of Roderick, the last of the Goths. Most of that everyone would be dead by now. I suppose this was the time when in English schools you would get a rounded kind of British history from the Romans, including the Goths and the various tribes that then invaded or tried to invade England. It's something that I've noticed in Spain. There seems to be a great hole in the telling of the history from when the Romans left to when the Muslims conquered. And it's even a little frustrating to read about the snippets of history about how the Franks tried to ally with the Romans on the basis of religion, they both being what we would call today Catholics, whereas the Goths were peculiarly and strongly Arian, until one of the later kings decided to convert to Orthodox Catholicism. And we find Zaragoza, which is where I used to live, being besieged a couple of times. There's an important battle there, and an important religious council in 591, where the conversion of Recared to Catholicism spurred a movement to get the rest of them converted and into the fold. However, most of this history is set in Italy and southern France and southern Germany. But again, near the end, there's the final story of how a certain Count Julian had defended the Gothic fortress in Africa, which is called Ceuta. Thereby, I get to find out why the hell the Spanish have an enclave in Ceuta. It seems the Goths had several fortresses in North Africa, but these had one by one been taken over by the Saracens. Speaking of whom, we're very keen to join in Count Julian's movement against Roderick, as Julian was annoyed at the treatment of his daughter, Florinda. So, in an act of revenge, he joined in with Musa, the Mohammedan chief, and said, hey, why don't you come over and conquer Spain? It'll be quite easy because even the Goths don't like their king at the moment. So Musa got together a band, 12,000 men, led by a Berber chief named Tariq. And guess what? That's where you get Gibraltar from. Yes, he landed there on what they baptised the mountain of Tariq, Jebel Tariq in Arabic, thence Gibraltar. So this was great for me. I got to find out a little bit more about the history of Spain, filling in this gap, although, as I say, it doesn't concentrate on Spain. And if you can take the writing style of almost a couple of hundred years ago, which I can, and I love it, by the way, you'll get a rip-roaring tale of battles, heathens, castles, love affairs. What you won't get, of course, is Gothic literature, because apart from an early translation of the Bible, there doesn't seem to have been hardly any. So we continue on our quest to fill in the missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle with an at least superficial knowledge now of who the Goths were, where they came from, how they dressed, what their religion was, what its rituals looked like, and how they behaved.